Well,
All
well,
right,
well. Look at us. We're back.
back everybody. Welcome to the stream, the show. It's our 99th episode of the Untitled Theme Entertainment Design Show.
Can't even believe it.
How about that? We've done this 99 times over the past 4 years.
Almost 4 years, yeah.
Wow. And Andy, maybe we can hang on afterwards and talk about that 100th anniversary show. But yeah, folks, we're planning. It's not an anniversary, but the 100th show is spectacular. We're planning on doing something special for that. So, keep your ears peeled and open for that. We're excited to do that, and what that will entail. It's been I don't know, maybe a month or so since we've done this. We took a little bit of a summer break. We're back. Appreciate all of you. I know that everyone's clamoring for our content here, so we appreciate that. But there's been a couple news stories in the mix, so I think Andy and I are just going to kind of rapid fire. Like the Villains Land got announced, or that already got announced last time we chatted.
Well, yeah, G23 was huge this year, and full of big promises and claims of like, oh, everything's already moving forward and it's going to happen. We're moving dirt, et cetera, and I'll believe it when I see it. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, a lot has been made about the Universal Disney Parks wars and Epic Universe and all that. And I mean, at the end of the day, when there's competition, I think that the consumer and the guest benefit, right? So we're excited to have those parks open up and the expansion, Villains Land. I mean, the concept art looks really cool. I have several friends that are, you know what it's like when people are like, oh, I can't talk about what I'm talking about. And then all of a sudden it's like things are announced like, oh yeah, this is what I've been doing for 10 years or well, not 10 years, but
yeah.
Many years. So,
yeah.
A late congratulations to all those folks.
I mean, without question, it's a great time to be a theme park fan, especially for domestic projects.
Yeah. Specifically domestic. I mean, there's a lot of money being invested. We also had those the Avengers ride. More details were announced, and then there's another ride they're adding, the little Kuka arm ride with the technology lab. But that was interesting. I don't think people were expecting that. So I think Cars, like a Cars area taking over Frontierland and Rivers of America. And I know there's a lot of people clamoring to figure out whether or not Muppet Vision 3D will be saved or if that's where Monstropolis is going to go. I will chain myself to that building if need to. No, it's
You're gonna start a Save Muppet Vision campaign, like the Splash people, but with 100% less racism.
Yeah, we could say that. More like the Mr. Toad people.
Then
just another kind of maybe a couple bits of news. The Area 15 project was just kind of unceremoniously canceled or not happening here in Orlando. So kind of surprising.
That was a bummer.
Yeah, that was a bummer. I do feel like there's a market for something like that. But that's when we first saw
it. I mean, it wasn't going to really work. When they.
What was that, Andy?
Sorry, I had a delay. I think I said I don't think it was going to work without a Meow Wolf component like in Vegas. I think that's sort of the anchor of the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree with you that it was probably going to face some challenges on that front by not having the anchor there. But who knows what they could have cooked up. All right, and then I would like to just give a quick plug. We do have John Paul Geurts waiting in the wing. So I'm going to talk about Big Break Foundation for a moment. So several years ago, we started the Big Break Foundation. It's all about trying to help people get their big break in the industry at large. And we have a very popular IAPA program where people get scholarships to go to IAPA. We get an offer travel assistance, and it really isn't possible without supporters from the industry. So last year we had great company sponsors like Myco2, Trent, Blue Telescope, and then Mall of America also contributed, which is really great. And right now we have like a ton of people that applied to it, and we're hoping to try to extend as much travel assistance as we can possible. And it's not possible without sponsors out there. So if you happen to have a little bit of extra change lying around at the end of the year, or think about it for next year, this program is very popular. And it's not every often where a few $1,000 sponsorship can really change people's lives. Like, I'm not even joking about that. Like, people being able to go to IAPA, it's a life changer for the people that we select to go. So we would love to take your money in honor of supporting people who are trying to break into the industry. So I'll just leave it at that. Andy, any other news before we bring on our, distinguished guest?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, coming live from Orlando, Florida Green Room, we have a John Paul Geurts, everybody. Woo!
Welcome to the show.
We don't have a live studio audience, so that's just me going.
insert audience track.
No audio cues required. I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Excellent.
Living the dream. Well, we're excited to have you out here, and it's going to be a big day for us. It's focusing a little bit on leadership, right? So we're going to talk about your story, and we have a lot of interesting thoughts about leadership and what it takes to be a leader and all that. You have quite a storied career. So why don't we just go ahead and start off by you telling us your path, before and then leading into the themed entertainment industry at large?
Well, I really came into this industry by accident. It wasn't really planned or intended. I was living in New York City, pursuing theatrical design, doing a lot of technical direction as well as crew work while I worked my way up the design ladder. But I happened to do a project with Chris Stapleton off Broadway, and when he got the job with Universal to work on the first park, he asked me if I would come down and art direct for him, which was amazing. I was in Florida for, 6-8 months or something like that, leading up to the opening of the park, and just had a great time. But I didn't particularly love Orlando, so I went back to New York when that project was over. And then a few years later, one of the producers from the original project phoned me up. I had just finished drafting as an assistant designer for Phantom of the Opera tour. Didn't have anything really going on. In fact, I had just left the unemployment office, but I got a phone call from Julie Zimmerman asking if I could come down and design Halloween Horror Nights for that first year. Not the Fright Nights year, but the actual HHN. So I think I started that job maybe the middle of August, and we were open for, 5-7 nights, something like that, for the first year. And we did a lot in a very short period of time. And then did several other events for Universal, working with Julie very closely. And then eventually decided that I liked Orlando, so I was going to stay.
I gotta ask, what was that first year like? For those that don't know, what Halloween Horror Nights was like. I mean, that's pretty legendary stuff there. What was it all about in those first, that first year? What was the makeup of it?
Well, we were trying to figure it out, sort of at that point, sort of they were, we did People Under the Stairs, I believe, was the main maze that we did. And then there was one in the old Jaws queue line that was left over from Fright Nights. It had just sat there. And so we did some renovations to that, but then, of course, and had live entertainment throughout the park, whether it be bands, shows, and the idea was the same as it is today. It was like transform the park. But the great thing about scaring people is it's best in the dark. And in those days, sort of the park was built, and I think most parks were built to just keep everything on. And so, there was no show control system for lighting. There was, zoning for audio was very specific. So the way we turned the lights off was going into each building and turning off circuit breakers and making a map.
Wow.
And, and that,
Crazy.
throwing some gobos on a buildings, and because you had all these sound stages, which were essentially big giant cycloramas, you could put anything you wanted on them. So it was a lot, but sort of I think every night of the performance, sort of me and a couple of other people, we had pockets full of zip ties and, sort of a little kit so that as things fell apart, we could put them back together.
Oh, forgive my ignorance. Well, what year was this for Florida?
93.
Oh my gosh. I was going to guess 97, but wow, 93 is way back then.
Somebody can fact check me on that, but I think it was 93.
They're celebrating the 33rd year this year, but like COVID kind of messed it up, so it's kind of hard to do math on that one.
And sometimes they count Fright Nights as the first year, and sometimes they don't, and so it's like you figure it out.
Yeah, somebody out there.
Talk about COVID messing it up. I was working on the second Marathon of Mayhem Lagoon show with Jason McManus, and we literally had finished the mix, and he got a phone call that Horror Nights was not going to happen in 2020. And then we chopped that show up and put it on in 2021.
Well, here we are.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's yeah.
It was a bummer.
There are we could spend the whole hour talking about 2020.
Yeah.
Let's not, because we did that on our first 25 shows. we were doing it live. Well, so would you consider the Horror Nights experience your first sort of themed entertainment leadership role, or was it just sort of like a big team of equals, or like what would you say is your first chance at like a major leadership role in themed entertainment?
I would say that was probably my first opportunity to really sort of be in charge of a project of that scale. I mean, think of it. We basically had 2 months to design and build it,
which is insane.
And so we had scenery in every shop in Orlando and elsewhere, because it just was it was too much for any one company at that speed. And some of the gags worked, some of them didn't, but we learned a tremendous amount. Also the operations team learned a tremendous amount, and because we were trying to run them much like an attraction, but it wasn't possible to really pulse people in. And then then operations quickly learned, no, we just have to let them in. But sort of learning what guests do to performers when they're got a good buzz on and they're trying to sort of have a good time, and we're trying to scare the crap out of them. Sort of it took a lot of trial and error to get it to the beautiful, well-oiled machine that it is today.
So Horror Nights down there has always been just a big boozy Halloween party, because I know here in Hollywood for a long time we didn't have alcohol at all.
Right, because the first couple of years were a disaster in Hollywood, and then they canceled for a while until they really kind of figured it out. But yeah, it was a long time ago. But then sort of then we realized, okay, the next year we needed to have 4 houses, I think, and so where's the real estate to do that? Sort of, and back in the early 90s, television was a big deal in Orlando, and sound stages weren't just sitting there.
Yeah.
So we bought a tent and we threw it behind the Bates Motel, and we did an extension of the Bates Motel and sort of what's beyond. And it was amazing, because we had that gorgeous facade, and we just had to create a little wing, and then put everybody in a tent, and nobody really realized that they were in a tent. And so that was great learning, so that sort of basically you could build a maze just about anywhere that there was flat land.
So I mean, we could probably talk about Halloween Horror Nights for another 5 hours, but maybe this is your first time as creative leadership. You know, what lessons did you learn from that?
Gosh, you know, given the time frame, we all just had to trust our gut. We just had to move. There wasn't a lot of time to contemplate and figure out something that was unproven. So, you know, we just moved, and we moved fast. And so, you know, sort of, I've always been kind of quick when it comes to making decisions and choices, but that really, you know, made me really move. And so I think that was great. And I mean, back then, there, you know, the organization wasn't what it is today. So it was, there weren't as many stakeholders. And it wasn't integrated. You know, food wasn't a big deal, and sort of specialty drinks and specialty merch. I mean, I think we sold a T-shirt, maybe, I don't know. So it was, it just was a completely different time. It was very entrepreneurial. We sort of would present what we thought was a good idea, and generally people bought it, and we moved forward.
Well, you know, like Patrick said, we could talk about HHN for hours, but after HHN and the success of HHN as an event and as it evolved, what was the next stop on your career journey after HHN?
So I was a freelance designer here in Orlando, doing just about anything: events, television commercials, television shows. Started freelancing at Nickelodeon, art directing TV shows, and very soon after I started, they began to license to theme parks, and we did messy game shows in theme parks like Silver Dollar City and Dollywood, and we did one at a wave pool, which was kind of hysterical and horrifying at the same time. And because I have a theater background and I'm a set and lighting designer, sort of I got pushed to do that. And so my TV work became less and less, and my sort of what we called Nickelodeon recreation at the time became more and more. And so it was started with shows, and then Viacom owned Paramount Parks, and so we did Nickelodeon lands in those parks. Chris Stapleton led a team that did them initially as Splat Cities, and then we renovated all of them as we had new IP to put into them. So we now had a lot of animated characters that we could use for shows and for rides. And so all of those Splat Cities were then transformed into Nickelodeon Central. And then, you know, and then we built it, and then we got a deal to build one of them in Australia. So in the early 2000s, I was, you know, on a plane, my very first international flight to Brisbane, Australia, you know, to figure out how we actually, you know, renovate another land into a Nickelodeon Central. And, you know, sort of as a result of that, you know, sort of the team at Nickelodeon renovated more theme parks around the world probably than anybody else, because it was always going in. You had some existing attractions that you had to fluff up. You got to put in some new ones. And, you know, sort of we created these really lovely lands, you know, sort of in all sorts of different places. And all of them, almost all of them, if not all of them, are still there.
And then so in that early period, you know, Nickelodeon was the studio was out here, correct? So the film studio was out in Orlando. Was the animation studio always in California, or did that move at some point?
The animation studio didn't really exist until later. But once, you know, sort of once they had a significant amount of animated shows under their belt, then they created their own animation studio, because they were basically farming it out, because Klasky Shupo did Rugrats and Wild Thornberrys, and other production companies handled some of those early shows. But then sort of they created that really wonderful pipeline, and became a creator driven network, and all they did was sort of work with brilliant people that had crazy ideas and try to get those shows on the air. It was a really spectacular time. But yes, to your point, so live action television was happening in Orlando, and then sort of it became more and more difficult to do sitcoms in Orlando, because sitcoms kind of thrive on special guest stars. And so then sort of Nickelodeon would have to bring the star and their entourage to Orlando for a week to film and tape. So it just became more of a burden, and so the company decided to move television production to LA. A lot of it was happening in Canada too, but principally then it was LA driven. And it was also it was changing, because Nickelodeon went from game shows to sitcoms, and then animated shows. But then animated shows kept growing, and also for the international business, which was just starting with Nickelodeon, they sorry about that. They animated shows, you can dub them in any language. It's easier, and so it was a really good strategy for the leaders of the company at the time to kind of really lean heavily into animation, and that gave them a consumer products division, and everything was growing. But kind of going back to kind of the leadership question from before, you're sort of, when you're at a company that is growing that rapidly and sort of trying to be innovative and clever, it's incredibly entrepreneurial. So we were all charged with doing our best possible work and doing it every day. And like I was saying about early days with Horror Nights, there wasn't a tremendous amount of oversight. And then, finally, sort of they started bringing in layers to help organize things, and that was great as well. But we got to do a lot of crazy stuff that I don't know if we could do today.
And I have a question. I'm going to kind of lead you into it, because I know, when you're dealing with TV, and particularly, animation shows and or even sitcoms or whatever, or they're really churning them out to maybe do 100 episodes if they're lucky, and then try to get into syndication, and then it's off the air, versus, like, let's just say a movie like Indiana Jones that can last and become a huge franchise and last for 20 years or so. And in the licensing world, right, it's not like these deals go on forever. They are usually 5 to 10 year deals if you're lucky. So can you just speak to that whole dynamic of licensing, how you modify, how you make decisions when you're in that world, and how it may affect just that whole concept compared to like an owner operator when they're designing things? I think you know what I'm trying to get at there.
So my guess is you're curious about sort of how you work with show creators to adapt their IP to something else, and sort of the logic behind sort of how many episodes you do sort of is purely based on how long your audience sticks around, right? But when we were working with, sort of even the live action shows, sort of marketing always wants you to plug as many shows as you can. And so, when we did Totally Nickelodeon at, Universal Studios Hollywood, it was, sort of, we had all of these little bits and interstitials and games based on Good Burger or The Secret Lives of Alex Mack. So it was like, and we integrated all of those things, but, sort of, I don't remember, even talking to any of those show creators about what we were doing. I don't know that they were a part of it. They might have been. Bob Brandenburg was writing and sort of directing all of those shows, and he had relationships with a lot of people throughout the company. So that might have happened. But it wasn't until later where, sort of the show creators really did get involved. And, sort of my theory was always, bring them along for the ride, sort of let them in at the very earliest stage so they understand what you're trying to do, and also understand that it's a different medium. Sort of, it's not, you can't just take a cartoon and throw it on stage. Sort of, the cycle is a little different. SpongeBob SquarePants are, it's 22 minutes, but it's 2 11-minute episodes. So that's all they've ever done. So now you're trying to do a, sort of a SpongeBob Broadway show, which is 2 hours and actually needs to have a true arc. You can't just grab one of those and pull it off the shelf. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think generally it was great. You talked a lot about different topics, no problem. And you want to do the next question? How's your I know your internet's choppy a little bit here. Looks okay now. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to disappear like that. But yeah, I mean, through all the IP management and art directing and production designing and creative direction and everything like that, getting back to the leadership conversation, how would you say your leadership style has changed, if it has, over the years and over the different, roles that you've had?
I would hope that it has evolved greatly. To be honest with you, sort of, when you're young and kind of full of yourself, it's, sort of, there's only one way to do things. And, sort of, and it took time to realize that, sort of, it's a true collaboration with a large group of people. But I had an amazing lesson when I was first in the role, and Bob Brandenburg and I were sort of, trailblazing all over the world, for the company. And, sort of, we were hired to do a parade for Paramount Parks. And, sort of, we were also working on the first Nickelodeon hotel. We were doing a couple of lands at the same time. And so, sort of, we hired, Manuel Cordero to design the parade, and we, brought in a excellent producer, and Bob was there as writer show director. And we hired an amazing costume designer. And, sort of, all of a sudden I realized I didn't have anything to do. I had basically outsourced myself.
You did super delegation.
and I sat in a production meeting, and they were talking, and they were so smart, making great choices and having a wonderful time doing it. And after the meeting, I just slowly backed out of the project and just let them do what they were doing, and was always there to provide the assistance, the guidance, like, sort of, if a vendor wasn't behaving, or if the park wasn't behaving, or, not that anybody doesn't behave, right? Everything's great. No, but it's just like, and I think of that often, that I was so fortunate to have that circumstance at a young point in my life, where it's really about getting your teams established, providing a structure and a support system for them so that they know what the expectations are, and then slowly backing out of the room so that they're like, you know, they know that they have, you know, that I have their back, and they have my support, but I'm not going to be in it. And, you know, I think that's, you know, that's key to being a truly successful creative leader, because you have to trust your creative team. You have to. Um,
We talked a little bit before the show about that, sort of like how the corporate creative culture, the creation business culture has changed over the years, and you know how it's a lot more difficult to you know get good ideas built and things like that. You know, if you want to talk carefully, I guess, about that a little bit, about how the corporate culture has changed and how, therefore, you know, leadership styles have had to change as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is dramatically different, because as you know, I was describing those early years at Nickelodeon. It felt like we were all building our own departments. You know, sort of. In some cases, that's bad, because you know people are building their own fiefdom. They're,
Right.
you know, and it's their world, and you know, sort of everybody takes great ownership of that world, and all of a sudden, the leaders of the company says, "Excuse me, it's not your world." Which is sometimes kind of hard to hear. But, you know, sort of, it's very important that, especially a corporation, you know, sort of, who has a strategic trajectory is able to achieve and maintain that, right? Um, but it's, but for me, it's gone a little farther, and maybe a little too far, in terms of, you know, sort of all of the layers and the preparation to get to the meeting with the leader that's going to make the choice. Um, because at the end of the day, who's ever the creative director or the producer or writer that has come up with this idea knows it better than anybody else. And sometimes that idea can get watered down by all of the input. And when it gets to the decision maker, you're like, kind of feels like the show we did last year or the year before. What, you know, sort of, and maybe that's because there was input that, you know, from somebody who really liked what was done a year ago or 2 years ago, and so that moved the project in one way or another. You know, I'm just speculating. But anyway, that's, I think that's the, you know, the main difference. But at the end of the day, you know, sort of, you have amazingly talented people in this business that are doing incredible work, and you know, sort of, and they're surviving. And like you were saying, you know, sort of, you know, before the, you know, sort of, I was on, you know, sort of, look at the investment that Universal and Disney and SeaWorld and other parks are making in their product. Sort of, clearly, it's a lucrative business, and it's going to need really talented people to keep it all at the top of their game, or keep them at the top of their game.
I have not to grind this to a halt, but I do have a question for you. You'd said earlier that you were benefited because you were a young leader and you looked around the room. But how long have you been working working when that moment happened? Because saying you were young, maybe that may be just a perspective of you having a long career. So I was curious about that.
Um, that's math stuff, right? That's like,
Yeah.
okay.
And I guess what I'm kind of getting at is sometimes people like they're really early in their career, they're a couple years out of college and they want to be creative director or they want to be a leader. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to kind of get that perspective of really far along were you really at that point?
I was probably in my mid-30s, maybe.
Yeah.
Early 40s.
Yeah.
But I was very fortunate, sort of all throughout my entire career. The sort of whether, sort of when I first moved to New York City, I was loading trucks for fashion shows, and we were installing fashion shows in hotels in New York City at, from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., right? And then you do the show, and then you tear it all down. But I was only on that job for a couple of weeks when then I got promoted to be a crew leader, extra $1 an hour more.
Hey.
Just saying. And so, sort of, I was there, running it. And then, sort of a few years later, I was working for Glimmer Glass Opera, assisting an amazing designer, Peter Dean Beck, who taught me so much. I had a cocktail with him via Zoom last week, and we were just, sort of, catching up on what that was like. And so, but I was Peter Dean's assistant for 2 seasons, but then for the 3rd season, they asked me to be their technical director and design an opera.
So artistic director and technical director.
And so, which I've always done weird combinations like that, sort of I'm a piano player, not professionally, but I've been doing it my entire life. And I did a production, and I was the second pianist and the set and lighting designer. So, sort of, I've made odd choices when it comes to, my professional career. But that has also, shown people that I'm a little gutsy, and I will take a gamble or take a risk to, ensure that something goes really, really well. And, sort of, and it has served me quite well.
I have a question. So I know your background pretty well. So before we kind of switch over to the after Nickelodeon,
we have known one another a little while, Mr. Kling.
Yeah, it's been many years, a decade.
All enjoyable too.
All enjoyable, and I wish we spent more time hanging out. You had the privilege, if I may, of working on the SpongeBob musical, and almost kind of going back to your roots in a way of theater. I'm sure we could talk about that for an hour. But I'd love to hear your perspective on it. I mean, I personally saw the musical. I thought the songs were amazing. It was so cool. And, right when they launched like the national tour, COVID hits, and hopefully there's still more legs to it, because it was a lot of fun watching it. So yeah, do you want to speak to that a little bit and what your involvement was, and how you applied that knowledge from recreation and experience design to that? What were you doing in the room? All that kind of good stuff. Just a little to hear that, a little bit about that.
I was enjoying listening to all those amazing creative people talk about what they wanted to do. It was amazing. Essentially, my job was I was the executive in charge. I was there, sort of when Tina Landau said, "What if we did it as a soundtrack rather than a score?" And the Nickelodeon music team said, "That'd be awesome. Who do you want?" And suddenly this room is brainstorming artists that could potentially, write songs for the soundtrack. And most of them are on the soundtrack to it today. It was amazing. And then you had David Zinn, doing crazy, crazy shit with design, and he's just brilliant. So I felt like the person that was like just, sliding notes, to them to try to free up their minds from a yellow sponge in a box, which, I had been doing for a very long time. Because, as you know, Patrick, I was in charge of all of the walk around characters as well. So,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time with fabric and foam. But so, I would find a book that was interesting and I would mail it to Tina, or, some design reference that was intriguing, and I'd send it to David, and, and Susan Vargo was the executive producer, who, is always amazing. And the, that was my role. And then to keep, everybody above us happy and content and, informed. It took 10 years to bring it to Broadway. So it would go dormant for months at a time.
Oh, cool. Andy, you're muted. Go ahead.
Reminds me of the Warner Brothers World Park in Abu Dhabi that, people worked on for 10 years, and it would be on, it would be off, it would be on, it would be off, and people, came and went, on the project, and then, suddenly it got built.
Exactly. I know people that have been working on Epic Universe for 10 years.
Yeah.
And, and it's, it's, again, it's they're amazing, but it's a long commitment to stay on one project like that. I'm more of I prefer a slower, or a faster burn, personally.
Yeah, it's a lot more exciting.
One thing that was pretty unique, at least at Nickelodeon, in my experience, there was once it hit, at least my desk, it was like it was being built. There wasn't like JP would make sure it was getting built, and then it would get built. So then we were actually working on things, which was really exciting and a great experience. As opposed to, sometimes it's a lot of conceptual work, which has value and is a lot of interesting, but then it doesn't get built, and it's very different.
Yeah, and that was the thing that I'm still very proud of. I believe there was probably only one park that we worked on that never was built. And that's really a testament to the business team and and that group and how they put together their deals and what they did to make sure that we were moving things forward. No, there were two.
Yeah, I thought of one offhand. Well, here I'm going to frame this question in a way, Andy. Sorry, I'm doing all these questions, but just
that's okay.
You get the next one. So Nickelodeon, you're senior vice president, and you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty details, but you make a decision to leave Nickelodeon, on top of the department and very much beloved, and eventually make your way to Universal Creative in a role. And there's a lot of differences in the companies and how they work. But yeah, what was that like? Just wanted to talk about that experience and where you landed with the little thing right behind you. I see Nickelodeon, then I see Epic Universe, which is a little bit of foreshadowing about what you were up to over there.
Right. And also, that little certificate on the wall there, that's from high school.
Oh, nice. So
I keep all my little things all on the same level, So it was an absolute joy to be selected to go work on Epic Universe. It was a bit strategic on my part. I felt like if I wanted to consult like I'm doing right now, it would be best to have another sizable project on my resume. So that was fantastic. I had just left a very large leadership role where I was on the road over 200 days a year. And I was, to be honest, I was exhausted. And so this gave me an opportunity to be home. It gave me an opportunity to sort of work with people that I've known for over 30 years, because, sort of so many of the people that are leading at Universal, or were at the time, are people that I've either worked with on the first part, or while I was there doing HHN stuff, or, sort of while we were doing Nickelodeon attractions and stores at Universal. So, and I think also because the Nickelodeon backlot was at Universal, I never felt like I actually left. I mean, because I know that property like the back of my hand. So, but the job was, essentially, being a part of the, creative leadership for Epic, but I had very specific tasks and sort of lanes to move within, which was great. Sort of, and I really enjoyed being able to focus on, sort of all of the intellectual property relationships, and the wardrobe and costume team and the media team, sort of, and for a while I supported graphics and live entertainment and placemaking and all these wonderful things. So it just, and if you like look at that job in a job description, sort of nobody would really put that together, but they, thankfully thought, well, this guy can do all of these different weird things, so maybe it'll work out okay. And so it was really delightful. And the project is going to be unbelievable and amazing. Sort of, it's, everybody's, seen the drone footage that's unofficial, but, sort of also, sort of, they've announced a lot of what's there, and I think it's going to exceed expectations.
Can you either directly or indirectly talk about some of the things you worked on that have been announced at Epic Universe?
Well, they haven't talked about any of the live entertainment yet. So,
Next question. No.
No problem.
Not really, to be honest with you. But the thing about my job was, sort of, again, it was about keeping the train on the tracks, sort of, and that's how I viewed it. My creative input, sort of was there when asked or needed, but really, sort of each land had, a powerhouse creative director and amazing producers and land directors and all of these people making that land amazing. Yeah. And the thing about it is, sort of, again, like I was talking about, when you have a lot of voices in the room, sometimes it can harm the product. So, sort of, I sat at the table pretty quiet most of the time, and just, sort of would shepherd and herd things that needed to move down a path as needed, and make sure that everybody had the support that they needed and wanted.
Yeah, I mean, that's the role of a good producer. I mean, it's just to provide people that you trust with the tools to do what they need to do, and the confidence to do that, that they're doing it correctly.
In theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've worked at big companies and small companies, and the big companies when they were small. What suggestions do you have on how someone new to the industry might thrive at a big company versus a small company?
Well, they are truly apples and oranges. Typically at a smaller company, you're going to get greater opportunity to, get your hands dirty and get involved, and have a voice. At a larger company, you're going to get the opportunity to work on things that you just could never imagine. Because the budget is higher, the stakes are higher. Sort of a company like Universal and Disney, of course, sort of, they've been doing this a very long time. So they truly understand, sort of that they need to have operations involved at an early point in time. Sort of, it's very collaborative there. Sort of, when I started, there was a whole row of offices, and it was all operations, and we were in concept, building a model, but yet that voice was there, which was so important, and foods was there, and retail was there, sort of everybody was there, legal was there, sort of, I love that legal team, and so they, and then as time went on, they got more and more involved, because eventually they have to own it. So, sort of, what I realized, sort of, is that embracing that was really powerful. That, sort of, and knowing that the ops folks could truly operate and take this over is essential, to the success. So that's, sort of, and then you can be independent too. I mean, sort of, I would say in today's climate, it's harder to be a freelancer, sort of, just because a lot of companies like a one-stop shop where they can get a lot of services, with one agreement, rather than in sort of, when I was younger, it was very common for theme parks to be put together much like you do a movie or a stage show, where you hire a director, you hire a creative director, you hire some designers, and everybody then comes together and is a production team, and then they disband when it's over. So it's, I'm finding that it's a different climate today, just being a consultant and, sort of getting those projects.
Yeah. Would you say that, like, let's just say an owner operator would rather hire a company like Tate or Hedema Group or THG, and they'd rather hire that, which then they may be using freelancers, but it's just not being directly contracted from like a Universal or Disney.
Yeah.
And that's been almost my entire career. It's like,
yeah,
I've, done big projects for Universal and Nickelodeon, but usually I'm working like through a Thinkwell or something like that, or the Hedema Group.
Right. Yeah. It's it's interesting, sort of, but it's, again, it's just, the world has changed, and also laws changed a lot, sort of.
Yeah.
There's, sort of, when I first started coming up in this business, there wasn't anything remotely resembling a human resources department.
Yeah.
And so it was, we did a lot more on our own, where, sort of, and, and freelancers were taken advantage of because they were really being treated like employees, and, and then they had to write laws about independent contractors and what it means to be an independent contractor and all of that, which has been generally good, but that also, I believe, had a little bit of a chilling effect on kind of being a freelancer as well, because, sort of, as a freelancer, there are things that you just can't do. You can't, Universal can't give you a laptop if you're a freelancer. You have to have your own, and then you have to have your own software, and you have to have all your own stuff, and your insurance, and all of that, which is something to think about if that's what you want to do.
No, great points. Well, JP, we'll just close on a final question. It's kind of a question we like to do, and you touched a little bit about it. But you've your career, you've spanned a while. You've seen different phases of the industry, and recently, I know you've worked with young professionals or probably interns and things like that at Universal and Hershey and wherever you may have been. I'm sure you worked with some emerging professionals, younger professionals. What words of wisdom would you have to those people who are entering or trying to break in or have just landed their first role? What are your top words of wisdom you'd have for those people?
Always be helpful is, always be listening, always be there to, move the project forward. And spend a lot of time listening, because you've got really smart people around you, and they'll appreciate the fact that you listen, you take notes, and you digest it, and the information. Be ready to be asked to be in charge of something. When you're a show set designer and you're just cranking through packages endlessly, but then the art director is swamped and really needs somebody that to take a greater design role in a queue or something like that. It's a great opportunity, and and seeing the opportunities and learning how to seize them when they do come up is vital to your success. And I think that's what has fueled a lot of my career. I've been able to juggle multiple things and multiple disciplines simultaneously, and build the relationships around all of those roles, whether it's with the legal team or the show creators or the executive producers, or the president of the company. It's just you have to be able to adapt and learn how to speak intelligently and clearly to that very wide audience of people, and read the room. Like when you're in a room full of executives, present yourself as an executive. You're there because they want your expertise, they want your input, they want your help. So be that person that they are expecting you to be. I was in a meeting once, at Nickelodeon, I was just promoted to, a vice president. And one of, the chief financial officer was in the room, and Sarah looked at me and she said, "You're not a vice president?" But I think that was really more of a commentary on how I carried myself and how I presented myself than the actual title or the role. And if you can, continually show people that you're ready, willing, and able, you're going to show up, you're going to digest the information as quickly as you can, and be present when somebody says, "Hey, what do you think?" I think that's your best shot.
That's some of the best advice on that question that I've heard on the show in a while. I think that's really, really the core of the experience of being new to the industry, is to listen and learn.
Yeah, because we all know we want to advance, and we all know that we want to have a trajectory. The one thing I will tell you, and I believe I said it at the top of this, is this was all kind of an accident for me. It wasn't really intended. I was going to climb the New York City ladder and design shows on Broadway. That was the goal. And this kind of got in the way, but it actually, has been pretty awesome.
Well, you've had an incredible career, and certainly one to aspire to. And I think that there's a lot of great stuff that a lot of people can learn from here today.
Yeah, thanks, JP. And I'll just say, do you have any plugs if people want to get a hold of you to say hello or follow you on social media and all that good stuff?
Well, sort of if you're following me on social media, I don't post a lot, but sort of there is going to be a Pink Palace update soon.
Okay.
So if you're jonesing, if you're itching for one of those, no, I'm just sort of Phenopoly.co is my site, and sort of it's just for me, building that site was just a great little journey down memory lane. I mean, I've got shows and projects there that are 40 years old, but the imagery, in my opinion, still stands up, whether the budget was $100 or it was $1 million. It's sort of, I've been very fortunate, and sort of have always had the goal of having really well done design and making sure that it is accessible for the audience and that the director gets to say what he or she needs to say. And so, but yeah, if you want to check out my site, go for it. If you ever have any questions, feel free to just give me a shout.
Yeah, and you said something that stuck with me, a long time ago, where you'd said you'd accept any connection request on LinkedIn because what's it to you? I don't know if you remember saying that, which I thought was interesting. You're just like, yeah, I'll accept a LinkedIn request, and I've always kept that as a thing that I strive through as well. I know you can't respond to everybody, but at least you can connect up with LinkedIn.
The last time I spoke with, I think there were some SCAD students that we had a chat, and they were asking about LinkedIn and social media, and sort of, and asked that question. And I said, yeah, I accept a lot, but I prioritize somebody who takes the time to write me a note to tell me why they want to link.
Yeah.
As opposed to just add me. Now, it's one thing if I know you, and then it's just fun because then I get to see your stuff. But, sort of, if it's a cold call, sort of, again, put your best foot forward. If you want to chat with somebody who is essentially a stranger, write a nice note.
Right. Yeah.
Good call on that one for sure. Well, JP, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us, and I thought this was a great episode. Please don't leave. We're going to put you in the green room, or we're going to go in the green room right after this and chat. But we're going to have our 100th episode spectacular. We're going to be, I'm going to say this. I'd like to just go over some of our best moments. We're going to cut some clips up and put it on social media and all that. So make sure you like and subscribe, follow us, and it's nice to be back here. We're not sure when that 100th anniversary show is going to happen, but make sure you like and subscribe.
What is happening in Orlando right now?
I don't know. There's an Amber Alert. Boys and girls.
All right. So make sure you like and subscribe and all that. But JP, thank you so much.
Hey,
Andy,
thanks for having me, guys. It's always a pleasure to see you, and sort of let's get together soon.
All right. Thanks
so
everybody.
much.
Bye. Take care.